She was the pack's punching bag. An Omega forced to live in a rotting shed while the Alpha's family slept in silk. But when the worst blizzard of the century hit, Astrid didn't save herself. She used her last logs of wood and her last scraps of meat to save 25 dying wolves she found freezing in the snow. She thought she would die of the cold alongside them. But she didn't know that those weren't just stray wolves. She had just saved the royal guard. And the next morning, the Lycan king wasn't knocking. He was breaking down the door. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. It was a sound that tore through the thin, warping wood of the shed that Astrid called home, chilling her to the marrow of her bones. Astrid shivered, pulling the threadbare woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders. It smelled of mildew and wet dog, but it was the only barrier she had against the sub-zero temperatures ravaging the territory of the Iron Creek pack. Astrid. The mental link snapped in her mind, a headache blooming instantly behind her eyes. It was Alpha Yora. Even in her head, his voice sounded like grinding gravel. Get to the main house. Now. The pipes have frozen in the scullery, and Luna Hestia is complaining about the noise. Astrid looked at her hands. They were raw, chapped, and bleeding from the harsh chemicals she used to scrub the pack house floors earlier that day. Alpha, she whispered, her voice trembling. The storm, the news said it's a whiteout. It's 20 below zero. Did I ask for a weather report, Omega? Yora growled. If you aren't here in 5 minutes, don't bother coming for rations tomorrow. The link cut off. Astrid swallowed the lump of fear in her throat. She had no choice. In the Iron Creek pack, being an unranked Omega with no wolf spirit meant you were less than a slave. You were a mistake. She wrapped ragged burlap sacks around her boots, her only protection against the snow, and pushed open the door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, knocking her backward. The world was a swirling vortex of white. She couldn't see the main house, which was usually visible up the hill. She lowered her head and trudged forward. Every step was a battle. The snow was already waist-deep in the drifts. By the time she reached the back entrance of the mansion, she couldn't feel her toes. She banged on the heavy oak door. It opened, revealing Kara, the Alpha's daughter. Kara was wearing a cashmere sweater, holding a steaming mug of cocoa. She looked at Astrid with pure disgust. You're late, Kara sneered. Daddy already fixed the pipes with his Alpha strength. You're useless. Please, Astrid chattered, her teeth clacking together violently. Can I come in just to warm up? Just for 10 minutes? Kara laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. And get slush on the floors you just cleaned? I don't think so. Go back to your hovel, rat. Kara slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Astrid stood there, stunned. Tears pricked her eyes but froze instantly on her lashes. They were sending her back out into death. She turned around. The storm had worsened. The walk back to her shed was a nightmare. She fell twice, the snow biting into her skin like acid. She was disoriented, losing the path. She wandered towards the edge of the dense forest that bordered the property. That was when she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a whimper. A low, pained sound of distress. Astrid froze. Her survival instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to get to the shed before she froze to death. But the sound came again. It was a chorus of whimpers. She squinted into the white void. About 50 yards away, near a cluster of frozen pines, she saw dark shapes. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Astrid pushed through the snow, her heart hammering. As she got closer, the shapes resolved into wolves. Huge, massive timber wolves. But they weren't moving. They were huddled together in a tight, shivering mass, half buried in a drift. They were covered in ice, their breathing shallow. Oh my God, Astrid whispered. There were 25 of them. She counted quickly. They looked like they had been caught in a flash freeze, perhaps crossing the river when the temperature plummeted. They were powerful beasts, but against nature's fury, they were losing. The largest one, a massive black wolf with a streak of silver across his snout, lifted his head. His golden eyes met hers. He didn't growl. He looked, pleading. Astrid looked at her shed in the distance, then back at the wolves. She was weak. She was starving. She was a nobody. I can't leave them, she thought. I know what it's like to be left in the cold. Okay, she said aloud, her voice lost in the wind. Okay, big guys. You have to help me. Dragging 25 massive wolves into a 10 by 10 shed was impossible for a human. But Astrid found a strength born of desperation. She started with the smallest ones, the ones that looked like younger juveniles. She grabbed them by the scruff, pulling, pleading with them to move. Come on, she grunted, slipping on the ice. Please. It's just over there. The wolves seemed to understand. Those who could walk limped alongside her, leaning their heavy bodies against her legs for support. The ones who couldn't walk, she dragged on an old plastic tarp she used to collect firewood. It took hours. Her fingers were numb, her lungs burning with the intake of icy air. By the time she got the last one inside, the massive black wolf, she collapsed onto the floorboards. The shed was packed. It was a sea of wet fur and shivering bodies. The smell of wet dog was overpowering, but Astrid didn't care. We need heat, she muttered, forcing herself to stand. She had a small cast iron stove in the corner. Beside it was a small pile of wood, her ration for the next 3 days. If she used it all tonight, she would freeze tomorrow. She looked at the wolves. They were piled on top of each other, trembling violently. The black wolf was watching her, his eyes intelligent and sharp. Astrid didn't hesitate. She shoved the wood into the stove. All of it. But it wasn't enough. The shed was drafty. Astrid looked around. Her only furniture was a wooden chair and a rickety table. She grabbed the rusty axe from the corner. With a grunt of effort, she smashed the chair. Then the table. She fed everything she owned into the fire. The stove roared to life, the cast iron turning a dull red. The temperature in the shed began to rise just enough to stop the shivering, but the wolves were weak. They needed energy to generate body heat. Astrid went to her small cooler. Inside was a slab of salted venison meat she had stolen from the garbage bins of the main house. It was supposed to last her 2 weeks. She pulled it out. She took a knife and began slicing it into 25 strips. I'm sorry it's not much, she whispered, moving among them. She hand-fed the wolves. Some were too weak to chew, so she mashed the meat with a rock until it was a paste and let them lick it from her fingers. She gave the largest piece to the black wolf. He sniffed it, then nudged her hand with his wet nose, pushing the meat back toward her. No, Astrid said, tears finally spilling over. I'm okay. You eat. You're big. You need it. He huffed, a sound that sounded almost like a sigh, and ate the meat in one bite. The fire crackled. The storm raged outside, burying the shed in snow. Astrid had no bed left. The wolves were covering every inch of the floor. She curled up in the center of the pile, seeking the warmth of their bodies. Immediately, the wolves shifted. The black wolf curled around her back. Another, a sleek gray female, laid her head on Astrid's lap. They created a living blanket of fur and heat around her. For the first time in her life, Astrid felt safe. She felt part of a pack. Good night, she whispered into the black wolf's fur. I hope you guys make it. She fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, unaware that the wolf she was using as a pillow was watching the door with the eyes of a trained killer. Astrid woke up to cold air. She shot up, panicking. The fire had died out hours ago. Sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the walls. The shed was empty. Hello? She croaked. She stood up, her joints stiff. There was no sign of the 25 wolves. No fur. No prints inside. Wait! On the floor where she had slept lay a single, perfect object. It was a dagger. But not just any dagger. The hilt was encrusted with obsidian and sapphires, and the blade was made of a dark, shimmering metal that looked like liquid night. She picked it up. It was heavy, lethally sharp. Why would they leave this? She wondered. Before she could think, the ground shook. Thump, thump, thump. Astrid grabbed the dagger and hid it inside her oversized coat pocket. She ran to the door and pushed it open. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine, blindingly white world. But the silence was broken by the roar of engines. Astrid looked toward the main pack house. A convoy was arriving. But this wasn't the usual delivery trucks or visiting alphas and luxury sedans. These were armored tactical vehicles, black, sleek, and terrifying. They bore no license plates, only a symbol painted in silver on the doors. A wolf howling at a broken moon. Astrid gasped. Everyone knew that crest. It belonged to the Royal Legion. The personal army of the Lycan king, Valerius. Why are they here? Astrid breathed. The vehicles tore up the driveway, crushing the pristine snow. Dozens of soldiers poured out. They weren't wearing ceremonial dress. They were in full tactical combat gear, assault rifles slung across their chests, silver bullets gleaming in bandoliers. Astrid saw Alpha Yora running out of the main house, struggling to button his blazer. Luna, Hestia and Kara were right behind him, looking terrified but also trying to primp, fixing their hair. Line up! Yora roared, his voice carrying down the hill. Everyone out! Now! Astrid knew she had to go. If she was missing during a royal inspection, Yora would kill her. She began to run through the snow, her legs burning. She reached the back of the lineup just as the main vehicle, a massive six-wheeled tank-like SUV, came to a halt. The atmosphere was suffocating. Alpha Yora bowed low. Your Majesty, we were not expecting you. If we had known, we would have prepared a feast. The door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was gigantic, at least 6'6", with shoulders that strained the fabric of his dark gray trench coat. He had hair as black as a raven's wing and a jawline that could cut glass. But it was his aura that made everyone drop to their knees. It was raw, suffocating power. A Lycan. King Valerius. He didn't look at Yora. He didn't look at the mansion. He took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air. His eyes, burning with a mix of gold and violet, scanned the crowd of bowing wolves. I am not here for your food, Yora, Valerius said. His voice was deep, a baritone rumble that vibrated in Astrid's chest. Then, surely for a tribute, Yora stammered, sweating despite the cold. My daughter Kara, she is of age. Kara stepped forward, fluttering her eyelashes. Your Majesty. Valerius didn't even blink at her. He walked right past the Alpha and his daughter as if they were invisible. He walked down the line of pack members. He was smelling the air. Hunting for something. Behind him, two other men stepped out of the vehicle. One was a broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his eye. Astrid gasped quietly. He looked familiar. His eyes, they were the eyes of the Black Wolf. The king stopped. He was standing directly in front of the Omega line. The lowest of the low. Astrid lowered her head, staring at her worn-out boots. She tried to make herself small. She smelled like soot, wet dog, and unwashed clothes. She was ashamed. The king took one more step. He stopped right in front of her. The silence was deafening. Alpha Yora looked up, his face turning purple. Your Majesty. Get away from there. That is just the help. She's filth. Silence, Valerius said. He didn't shout, but the command slammed Yora into the snow as if a giant hand had swatted him. Valerius reached out. His hand, large and calloused, tipped Astrid's chin up. Astrid trembled, meeting his gaze. "Tell me," the king said softly, his thumb brushing the dirt off her cheek. "Did you sleep well?" Astrid blinked, confused. My king?" Valerius smiled, and it transformed his terrifying face into something blindingly handsome. "The venison," he said. "It was a bit tough. But the fire was perfect." Astrid's eyes widened. She looked at the man with the scar behind the king. He winked at her. "You," Astrid whispered. "You were the wolves." Valerius stepped back and turned to his soldiers. He raised his voice so the entire pack could hear. "Last night, my royal guard and I were tracking a rogue faction. We were ambushed by a warlock's hacks, stripped of our human forms, and weakened by the storm. We were dying." He pointed a finger at Astrid. "This girl. This Omega. She didn't know who we were. She saw 25 hungry beasts, and she gave them the food out of her own mouth. She burned her own furniture to keep us warm." Valerius turned to look at Alpha Yora, his face darkening into a mask of pure rage. "And while she was saving the crown," Valerius growled, his voice dropping to a predatory hiss, "I saw how she lives. I saw the bruises on her arms. I saw the shed you force her to sleep in." The king's eyes began to glow. "Commander Bjorn!" Valerius barked. The scarred man stepped forward. "Yes, Alpha. Take Alpha Yora and his family into custody. Charge them with treason and negligence of a royal savior." "No!" Kara screamed. "She's a nobody. She's a rat." Valerius turned back to Astrid. He unclasped his heavy fur-lined cloak and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled like pine and expensive cologne. It dragged on the ground, enveloping her completely. "She is not a nobody," Valerius declared, his voice ringing across the frozen valley. "She is the only wolf in this valley with the heart of a queen." He held out his hand to her. "Come, Astrid. We have much to discuss. And I believe I owe you a new table." The interior of the king's tactical SUV was quieter than a tomb, yet it felt more alive than any place Astrid had ever been. The seats were upholstered in black leather that felt like butter under her cracked, frozen fingertips. The air was warm, smelling of rich espresso and sanitized steel. Astrid sat huddled in the corner of the massive bench seat. The king's heavy fur cloak swallowed her small frame. She was trembling, but not from the cold anymore. It was the proximity. King Valerius sat across from her. In the confined space of the vehicle, he was overwhelming. He had removed his tactical vest, revealing a black compression shirt that clung to muscles carved from granite. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a tablet, his jaw set in a hard, angry line. Next to him sat the scarred man, Commander Bjorn, the king's cousin and right-hand man. "Your Majesty," Bjorn said, his voice low. "The convoy has secured the prisoners. Alpha Yora is in the transport truck behind us. He's shouting about his rights." Valerius didn't look up. "Yora has no rights. He violated the sacred guest right. He starved a pack member, and he nearly killed the crown." Valerius's finger tapped the screen of the tablet hard enough to nearly crack it. "I want him in the Iron Wing when we get to the Citadel. No sunlight. No visitors." "And the girl?" Bjorn asked, glancing at Astrid. Valerius finally looked up. His eyes, a swirling storm of violet and gold, locked onto Astrid. She flinched instinctively, raising an arm to protect her face, a reflex born of years of abuse. The movement made Valerius freeze. The air in the car dropped 10 degrees. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a sound so primal it made the windows rattle. "Astrid," Valerius said softly, though the restraint in his voice was terrifying. "Lower your arm." Slowly, she lowered it. Her wrist was thin, the bone prominent, covered in old yellow bruises and fresh red scratches from the firewood. Valerius reached into a compartment next to him and pulled out a silver medical kit. He moved from his seat to the one next to her. Astrid pressed herself against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I am not going to hurt you," Valerius murmured. He took her hand. His grip was firm but impossibly gentle, like holding a baby bird. "I need to clean these cuts." The wood was dirty. Infection travels fast in a body this malnourished. Astrid watched in stunned silence as the Lycan king, the most powerful predator on the continent, the man who could crush skulls with one hand, uncapped a bottle of antiseptic. He poured it onto a cotton pad and began to dab at her raw knuckles. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was raspy. Valerius paused. "Why what? Why are you doing this?" "I'm just an Omega. I'm defective. I don't even have a wolf." Valerius resumed cleaning her hand, his touch lingering on a particularly nasty cut. "You think because you have no wolf, you have no value? That's the law," Astrid said simply. "No wolf, no rank. No rank, no rights." Valerius looked up, his eyes burning. "Laws written by weak men to make themselves feel strong. Last night, 25 of my elite guard, Lycan warriors who have slain giants, were freezing to death. Their wolves were dormant from the warlock's hacks. They were helpless." He wrapped a bandage around her hand, securing it with a metal clip. "You were the only one with teeth last night, Astrid. You fought the winter for us. You fed us before yourself. That is not the behavior of an Omega. That is the behavior of a queen." Astrid felt a blush heat her cheeks, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. I didn't want you to die alone. And because of that," Valerius said, leaning in close, his scent of pine and rain overwhelming her senses, "you will never be alone again. I swear it." The car slowed down. Commander Bjorn looked out the window. "We've arrived, Your Majesty." The Obsidian Citadel. Astrid looked out the tinted window and gasped. They weren't just at a house. They were entering a fortress. The Obsidian Citadel rose from the side of a mountain, a sprawling metropolis of black stone and glass that overlooked the capital city. Walls 50 feet high surrounded the perimeter, patrolled by wolves the size of horses. As the convoy passed through the massive iron gates, Astrid saw hundreds of people lining the streets. They weren't cheering. They were bowing. Deep, reverent bows. "They know," Bjorn noted, checking his phone. "The news is out. The miracle of the blizzard. Someone leaked the footage of you carrying the king out of the shed." Astrid's eyes widened. "Footage? My tactical vest has a body camera," Valerius explained. "It records everything. The council has seen it. The world has seen it." The SUV stopped in front of the grand staircase of the palace. Footmen in red and gold livery rushed to open the doors. Valerius stepped out first, instantly commanding the space. He turned and held out his hand to Astrid. She hesitated. She was wearing muddy boots, leggings with holes in the knees, and a sweater that was 3 sizes too big and stained with soot. She looked like a beggar. "I can't," she panicked. "Look at me. I'll shame you." "You are wearing my cloak," Valerius said, his voice brooking no argument. "That makes you higher rank than anyone in this building. Take my hand." Astrid took it. He pulled her out. The cold mountain air hit her face, but she didn't shiver. Valerius pulled her against his side, his arm wrapping around her waist like a steel band. A woman was waiting for them at the top of the stairs. She was tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled back into a severe bun. She wore a suit that cost more than Astrid's entire life. "Your Majesty," the woman said, bowing stiffly. Her eyes flicked to Astrid, and for a split second, Astrid saw a flash of judgment before the mask of politeness slammed back into place. "We have prepared the royal suite for you, and guest quarters for the girl." "No," Valerius said. The word cracked like a whip. The woman blinked. "Sir? Astrid stays in the East Wing. In the Emerald Room. Next to mine." The woman's jaw tightened. The East Wing is reserved for family and bonded mates. Surely the guest quarters and the servants' annex would be more appropriate for an unranked. Valerius didn't let her finish. Lady Morgana. If you wish to keep your tongue, you will watch how you use it. Astrid is under my personal protection. She goes where I go. If she is cold, I will burn this palace down to warm her. Do you understand? Lady Morgana paled, stepping back. Perfectly, Your Majesty. Valerius looked down at Astrid. Let's get you fed. Real food this time. As they walked up the stairs, Astrid felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. She felt safe in Valerius's grip. But she also felt a new kind of danger. The cold of the blizzard was gone, replaced by the icy stairs of the royal court. The bath was the size of a swimming pool. Astrid sat in the steaming water, surrounded by bubbles that smelled of lavender and honey. 3 maids had scrubbed the grime from her skin, washed the soot from her hair, and treated the frostbite on her toes with a tingling blue salve. For the first time in years, she was clean. She stood up and walked to the full-length mirror. She hardly recognized herself. Her skin, usually gray with dirt, was pale and luminous. Her hair, which she thought was a dull brown, dried into waves of rich, dark mahogany. But she couldn't look away from her ribs. They pushed against her skin, a stark reminder of the starvation she had endured. And the scars. Thin white lines across her back where Kara had whipped her with a riding crop for insubordination. There was a knock on the door. Enter, Astrid said, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't a maid. It was a man in a white coat carrying a medical tablet. He had kind eyes and thick glasses. Miss Astrid, he said, bowing. I am Dr. Aemon, the royal physician. The king has ordered a full health panel. He is very concerned about your nutritional levels. Astrid nodded, wrapping a silk robe around herself. I'm okay. I'm used to being hungry. Dr. Aemon frowned. No one should get used to that. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. I need a blood sample. Astrid sat. The prick of the needle was nothing compared to the pain she dealt with daily. Dr. Aemon took 3 vials of blood. He slotted one into a portable analyzer machine. He hummed, tapping the screen. Iron is critically low. Vitamin D deficiency. We can fix all of that with supplements and a diet plan. The machine beeped. A red light flashed. Dr. Aemon frowned. That's odd. What? Astrid asked, fear spiking. Is something wrong? The machine is giving an error code. It says, species mismatch. He took the second vial and put it into a different slot. Usually this happens if the sample is contaminated or... The second machine beeped louder this time. Dr. Aemon took off his glasses and wiped them. He looked at the screen, then at Astrid, then back at the screen. His hands started to shake. Miss Astrid, he whispered. You said you have no wolf. I don't, she said. I've never shifted. I'm 22. If I had a wolf, she would have come out at 16. You don't have a normal wolf, Dr. Aemon corrected, his voice filled with awe. He turned the screen toward her. The DNA helix on the screen wasn't the usual double strand of a human or the triple strand of a werewolf. It was a quadruple strand, glowing with a faint, pulsing gold light. This is Lycan blood, the doctor said. But not just Lycan. This marker here, this is the ancient strain. It hasn't been seen in 500 years. It's the bloodline of the White Moon Valkyries. Astrid stared at him. Valkyries? That's a myth. They were the warrior queens who fought beside the first Lycan kings. It is not a myth, Dr. Aemon said, pacing the room frantically. Your wolf isn't missing, either. She's locked. There is a seal on your core. A magical binding so strong it would have killed a lesser being. Someone put this on you when you were a baby to hide what you are. Astrid felt the room spin. A seal? But who? My parents were nobodies. They died in a car crash when I was 2. Were they nobodies? Dr. Amon asked. Or were they hiding you? Before Astrid could answer, the door swung open. It wasn't Valerius. It was Lady Morgana, followed by 2 armed guards. Dr. Amon, she said smoothly, her eyes scanning the room. The king is requesting your presence in the war room immediately. There is a situation with the prisoner. I am in the middle of an examination, Dr. Amon protested, trying to hide the tablet behind his back. Now, Doctor, Morgana snapped. Dr. Amon looked at Astrid, panic in his eyes. He quickly tapped a button on the tablet, deleting the results from the screen, but he slipped a small data chip into his pocket. I will return, Miss Astrid. He hurried out. Lady Morgana didn't leave. She stepped into the room, the door clicking shut behind her. The 2 guards stood by the exit, arms crossed. So, Morgana said, circling Astrid like a shark. The little stray cleans up well. Valerius is quite taken with you. He's threatening to execute Alpha Yora for mistreatment. Yora deserves it, Astrid said, finding a sudden backbone. Perhaps, Morgana mused. She reached out and touched the silk of Astrid's robe. But kings are fickle creatures. They love a charity case for a week, maybe a month. But Valerius needs a queen. He needs a political alliance. He is betrothed to the daughter of the Southern Alpha. Did he tell you that? Astrid felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. No, of course not, Morgana smiled, a thin, venomous thing. Why would he ruin the fun? You are a pet, Astrid. A brave little pet who warmed his feet. But do not mistake gratitude for love. You do not belong here. Valerius asked me to stay, Astrid said, standing up. She was shorter than Morgana, but she refused to cower. Valerius is confused by his beast's instincts. Morgana hissed. She leaned in close. I run this court. I ensure the Lycan bloodline remains pure. We cannot have a gutter rat polluting the gene pool. If you are smart, you will take the money I am about to offer you. And you will disappear. She pulled a check from her pocket. It was for $1 million. Astrid looked at the check. It was more money than she could imagine. It was freedom. But then she remembered the black wolf. She remembered how he curled around her back to keep her warm. She remembered the rage in his eyes when he saw her bruises. Astrid took the check and ripped it in half. I don't want your money, Astrid said, her voice shaking but clear. And if Valerius wants me to leave, he can tell me himself. Morgana's face turned ugly. The mask dropped completely. You foolish girl. You think you are safe because you are in the palace? Accidents happen here all the time. Maids slip on stairs. Food gets spoiled. She signaled to the guards. Teach her a lesson in manners. Don't break bones, but make sure she hurts enough to want to leave. The guards stepped forward, cracking their knuckles. Astrid backed away, hitting the wall. She had no weapon. The dagger Valerius's guard had left her was in her old coat, miles away in the laundry chute. Help, she screamed, but the room was soundproofed. The first guard lunged. Astrid ducked, scrambling over the bed. She wasn't a fighter, but she was fast. She had spent her life running from Kara. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the nightstand and threw it. It shattered against the guard's chest, staggering him. Grab her. Morgana shrieked. The second guard caught Astrid by the hair, yanking her back. She screamed as pain exploded in her scalp. He threw her to the ground. Hold her down, Morgana ordered, pulling a small syringe from her jacket. Let's see how the king likes his pet when she's too sick to speak. Astrid struggled, kicking and scratching. But the guards were too strong. One pinned her legs, the other pinned her arms. Morgana uncapped the needle. A sickly green liquid bubbled inside. Just a little wolfsbane cocktail. It won't kill you, but it will make your organs feel like they are melting. She brought the needle to Astrid's neck. Astrid squeezed her eyes shut. Valerius. She screamed in her mind. Help me. Deep inside her chest, something snapped. It wasn't a bone. It was the seal. The golden lock that Dr. Amen had seen on her DNA shattered. A wave of heat, hotter than the stove she had fed, hotter than the sun, exploded from Astrid's core. Her eyes flew open. They weren't brown anymore. They were glowing a blinding, pure white. Get off. The voice didn't come from her throat. It came from the air itself. A shockwave of pure energy blasted outward from Astrid's body. It hit the guards like a freight train, launching them backward. They smashed into the walls, falling unconscious instantly. Morgana was thrown across the room, crashing into the vanity mirror. She slid to the floor, groaning, looking at Astrid with pure terror. Astrid stood up. She felt huge. She felt power rushing through her veins like liquid fire. She looked at her hands. They were glowing. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the bedroom exploded inward, splinters of wood flying everywhere. King Valerius stood in the doorway. His eyes were fully black, his claws extended, his chest heaving. He had felt it. He had felt the distress of his mate. He looked at the unconscious guards. He looked at Morgana bleeding on the floor. And then he looked at Astrid, glowing with the light of the ancients. Valerius dropped to his knees, his head bowing instinctively. A white wolf, he breathed. My Luna. The silence in the emerald room was heavier than the shattered furniture littering the floor. Lady Morgana lay amidst the glass of the vanity mirror, clutching her bleeding side, her face a mask of shock that was quickly hardening into malice. Valerius was still on his knees, staring up at Astrid. The blinding white light that had erupted from her skin was fading, leaving her looking fragile, swaying on her feet. The adrenaline was crashing. Astrid, Valerius whispered, reaching out to catch her just as her knees buckled. He pulled her into his chest, growling deep in his throat at the scent of the wolfsbane syringe lying on the carpet. She tried to poison you. She said. Astrid gasped, clutching his shirt. She said I was a stray. That I didn't belong. Valerius turned his head toward Morgana. His eyes were voids of pure black. The Lycan beast surfacing. You dared to touch my mate. Morgana scrambled backward, smearing blood on the pristine floor. Mate? You are deluded, my king. Look at her. That wasn't a shift. That was sorcery. Omegas don't glow. Werewolves don't blast energy like bombs. She is a witch. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. In the Lycan world, witchcraft was the oldest enemy, a perversion of nature punishable by immediate death. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Commander Bjorn burst in, followed by a dozen royal guards and 3 elderly men in gray robes. The High Council. What is the meaning of this? The lead elder, a man named Magnus, demanded. He looked at the wreckage of the room, the unconscious guards, and the glowing remnants of energy still crackling in the air. She attacked me. Morgana screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Astrid. I caught her trying to steal from the king, and when I confronted her, she used dark magic. She's a necromancer sent to destroy the bloodline. Valerius roared, a sound that shook the chandelier. Liar. She is a white wolf. I felt her seal break. Elder Magnus narrowed his eyes, looking at Astrid. She was shivering in Valerius's arms. Her skin pale, her veins pulsing with a strange gold rhythm. A white wolf has not been born in centuries, Magnus said coldly. But witches often mimic our energy to infiltrate the courts. The girl has no scent of a wolf, Valerius. She smells of ozone and ash. Because her wolf was bound. Valerius argued, standing up and lifting Astrid effortlessly in his arms. Dr. Amen found the seal. It was the ancient binding. Or so she made it appear, Morgana spat, struggling to her feet. If she is a wolf, let her shift. Right now. Astrid buried her face in Valerius's neck. I don't know how, she whispered. It burns. It hurts so much. Magnus stepped forward. If she cannot shift, she cannot be Luna. And if she used magic to harm a high-ranking noble, she must be purged. Over my dead body, Valerius snarled, his claws extending. The royal guards tensed, unsure who to aim at. Their king or the council. Stop! Astrid cried out. She pushed slightly away from Valerius. She looked at the elder. I am not a witch. I don't know who I am, but I know I'm not evil. Magnus looked at her, his expression unreadable. There is only one way to prove the truth without a shift. The Moonstone trial. Valerius stiffened. No. The Moonstone burns false blood. If she is weak from the poison. If she is a Lycan, the stone will sing, Magnus declared. If she is a witch, or if she is merely a human pretending, the stone will turn her to ash. He looked at Valerius. If you are so certain she is your mate, your majesty, you should have no fear. Valerius looked down at Astrid. The risk was immense. But Morgana was smiling, convinced of her victory. Astrid took a deep breath. She saw the doubt in the eyes of the guards. She saw the hatred in Morgana's eyes. And she saw the desperate hope in Valerius's. I'll do it, she said. The great hall of the citadel was packed. Word had spread instantly. The stray savior was on trial for witchcraft. In the center of the hall stood a pedestal of black obsidian. Resting on it was a jagged, rough crystal the size of a human head. It looked dull and gray. The Moonstone. Alpha Yora and his family had been dragged from the dungeons to watch. They stood in chains near the back. Yora looked gleeful. I knew it, he muttered to Kara. She's a freak. She'll burn, and then we'll be reinstated. Astrid walked down the long aisle. She wore a simple white linen dress they had given her. She was barefoot. Valerius walked beside her, his hand hovering near the small of her back but not touching her. By law, she had to face the stone alone. She reached the pedestal. The stone seemed to hum a low vibration that made her teeth ache. Place both hands on the stone, Elder Magnus commanded. Lady Morgana stood in the front row, bandaged and smug. Goodbye, rat, she mouthed. Astrid closed her eyes. She thought of the wolves in the blizzard. She thought of the fire she built. She wasn't a witch. She was a protector. She slammed her hands onto the stone. For a second, nothing happened. Then a scream tore from Astrid's throat. It wasn't heat. It was cold. Absolute, freezing cold rushed from the stone into her palms, freezing her blood, stopping her heart. It felt like dying. The stone turned black. A witch! Morgana screamed triumphantly. Kill her. Wait! Valerius roared, stepping forward. The blackness in the stone wasn't darkness. It was the absence of light before a supernova. Crack! A spiderweb fracture appeared on the Moonstone. Then another. Rays of blinding, prismatic light shot out from the cracks. The light wasn't just white. It was silver, gold, and blue. It swirled around Astrid like a tornado. The cold vanished, replaced by a searing fire in her bones. Astrid threw her head back, her back arching. The pain was gone. In its place was power. Her body began to change. The sound of snapping bones echoed through the silent hall. But Astrid didn't scream in pain anymore. She screamed in triumph. She fell to all fours. Her skin rippled. Fur white as the driven snow burst forth. Her face elongated. Her hands became massive paws tipped with silver claws. In the span of a heartbeat, the girl was gone. Standing in her place was a wolf. But not just a wolf. She was massive, standing nearly as tall as Valerius in his human form. Her fur was so white it seemed to glow. On her forehead was a distinct mark in silver fur, a crescent moon entangled with a sword. The mark of the Valkyrie. The giant white wolf shook her fur, scattering sparks of light. She turned her massive head toward the council. Her eyes were pools of liquid gold. She let out a howl. It was a beautiful, terrifying sound that shattered the glass windows of the great hall and brought every wolf in the room to their knees. It was the howl of a queen. The great hall of the obsidian citadel had fallen into a silence so profound that the only sound was the crackling of energy still dissipating from the shattered moonstone. Astrid, now standing in her massive white wolf form, towered over the council. Her fur was not merely white, it possessed a pearlescent quality, shimmering with an inner light that cast long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. She felt the power of the Valkyrie bloodline surging through her, a torrential river of ancient magic that had been dammed up for 22 years. She looked down at Valerius. The Lycan king stood before her, not as a ruler, but as a devotee. His eyes, usually hard and commanding, were swimming with raw emotion. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and buried them in the thick ruff of her neck. "Beautiful," Valerius murmured, his voice thick with awe. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." A low purr rumbled in Astrid's chest, vibrating through the floorboards and into the bones of everyone present. It was a sound of comfort for her mate, but a sound of warning for her enemies. Elder Magnus, the man who had just moments ago condemned her to death, was pressing his forehead into the cold stone floor. "Forgive us, Great One," he wept, his voice cracking. "We were blind. The texts said the Valkyrie line was extinguished in the Great War. We did not know." Astrid turned her massive head toward him. She didn't need to speak. A wolf's intent was projected directly into their minds. "Ignorance is not a shield for cruelty, Elder. You were ready to burn an innocent because it suited your politics." Magnus flinched as her mental voice echoed in his skull. "We will resign," he stammered. "The council will submit to your judgment. You will remain." Astrid's eyes narrowed. "But the laws change today. No longer will a wolf's worth be measured by their shift. If I can rise from the ashes of a shed to stand as your queen, then every Omega in this kingdom deserves respect. You will rewrite the codex, Magnus. Or I will find elders who can." "It will be done," Magnus cried out. "It will be done immediately." But not everyone was bowing. To the left of the dais, Lady Morgana was backing away. Her face was a mask of crumbling plaster. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the sheer, primal terror of a prey animal realizing the cage is locked. She had played the Game of Thrones and lost in the most catastrophic way possible. She turned and sprinted toward the servants' entrance, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. "Stop her!" Commander Bjorn roared, drawing his weapon. "No," Astrid commanded mentally. "She is mine." Astrid moved. It wasn't a run. It was a blur of motion. She cleared the 50 feet between the dais and the door in a single, fluid leap. She landed in front of Morgana with the weight of a boulder, her claws gouging deep grooves into the stone floor. Morgana shrieked, skidding to a halt. She looked up into the jaws of the predator she had tried to poison. Astrid snarled, a sound like tearing metal, and snapped her jaws inches from Morgana's face. Morgana fell backward, scrambling on her elbows. "Please. Your Majesty. I was misguided. I only wanted a strong Luna for the king. I did it for the kingdom." Valerius walked up behind. He placed a hand on Astrid's shoulder, his touch grounding her. "You did it for yourself, Morgana. You wanted a puppet on the throne. And when you saw a woman with more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline, you tried to murder her." Astrid began to shift. The light returned, blinding and warm. When it faded, she stood in her human form, draped in the heavy velvet cloak Valerius had ready for her. Her hair was wild, her eyes still glowing with residual gold. She looked every inch the queen of nightmares that Morgana feared. "You like poison, Lady Morgana?" Astrid asked, her voice calm but deadly cold. "You like to make people feel small? Helpless?" Morgana sobbed, clutching the hem of Valerius's coat. "Mercy, please. I will leave. I will go into exile." "Exile is too good for you," Astrid said. She looked at Commander Bjorn. "The mines in the Northern Territory. They use manual labor to extract the silver. Correct?" "They do, my queen," Bjorn answered with a dark grin. "It is back-breaking work. 12-hour shifts. No sunlight." "Perfect," Astrid declared. "Strip her of her titles. Seize her assets and distribute them to the Omega shelters. Lady Morgana will spend the rest of her days digging in the dirt. Let her see what it feels like to be the lowest creature in the pack." Guards seized Morgana, dragging her away as she screamed and kicked, her cries echoing until the heavy door slammed shut. Astrid took a deep breath, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving her exhausted. But there was one loose end left. She turned her gaze to the back of the room. Alpha Yora and his family were huddled together. Kara was weeping silently, her makeup running down her face. Luna Hestia looked like she was about to faint. But Yora was trying to straighten his spine. Trying to salvage some scrap of dignity. "Astrid," Yora said, his voice trembling but loud enough to be heard. "Niece. I see you have blossomed." The court gasped. "Niece?" Valerius growled, stepping forward menacingly. "You never claimed her as kin." I was protecting her." Yora lied, sweat pouring down his forehead. "If people knew she was a Valkyrie, they would have hunted her. I kept her humble to keep her safe. Surely, Astrid, you understand? I gave you a home when your parents died." Astrid walked toward him. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. She stopped 2 feet from the man who had made her life a living hell. "You are right, Yora," she said softly. Yora exhaled, a smile tugging at his lips. "See? I knew you were reasonable. We are family, after all." "You did give me a home," Astrid continued, her voice hardening like diamond. "You gave me a shed with rotting wood. You gave me a blanket full of lice. You gave me the scraps from your table while you ate steak." She leaned in close. "And last night, when I begged you for 10 minutes of warmth, you shut the door in my face." Yora's smile vanished. "I won't kill you, Yora," Astrid said, raising her voice so the entire hall could hear the verdict. "Death is too easy. You want to be part of my family? Then you will live exactly as I did." She turned to Commander Bjorn. "Escort the former Alpha and his family back to Iron Creek. Do not let them enter the main house. That house will be converted into a sanctuary for the sick and elderly." "And where shall they live?" Bjorn asked. Astrid smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The shed is still standing, isn't it? I believe the roof leaks, and the wind cuts right through the walls. They can have it." "You can't be serious." Kara shrieked. "We'll freeze. It's winter." "Then I suggest you huddle together," Astrid said, turning her back on them. "I hear body heat works wonders. And if you get hungry, I'm sure there are some scraps in the garbage bins. You'll have to fight the rats for them, though." "I did." "Take them away," Valerius ordered. As Yora and his family were dragged out, wailing and begging, a cheer erupted in the great hall. It started low, then grew into a roar. The royal guard, the nobles, even the servants were cheering for the White Queen. Astrid felt her legs give way. The shift, the trial, the magic, it was too much. She didn't hit the floor. Valerius caught her, scooping her up into his arms, bridal style. "I've got you," he whispered against her hair. "Rest now, my love. The war is over." Astrid rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. "Did I do good, she mumbled sleepily. You changed the world, Valerius replied, kissing her forehead as he carried her out of the hall toward their future. 3 months had passed since the trial. The winter had finally broken, giving way to a lush, vibrant spring. The obsidian citadel was no longer a place of fear. It was a beacon of hope. On the highest balcony, Astrid stood watching the sunset painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. She wore a simple dress of white silk, and around her neck hung a new pendant, a piece of the shattered moonstone set in gold. She wasn't alone. Valerius came up behind her, wrapping his massive arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, inhaling her scent, lavender, honey, and the ozone of ancient magic. The reports are in from Iron Creek, Valerius said softly. And? Astrid asked, leaning into his warmth. Yora lost 3 toes to frostbite last week, Valerius reported without an ounce of sympathy. And Kara was seen begging for work at the scullery. The new alpha running the sanctuary says they are learning humility. Good, Astrid said. Maybe one day, when they understand what hunger truly feels like, I'll send them a blanket. Maybe. Valerius chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. You are ruthless, my queen. I learned from the best, she teased, turning in his arms to face him. Valerius's expression softened. He reached up, cupping her face with his large hand. You know, for years I thought my mate would be a warrior. Someone who could fight armies. And instead you got a maid who fights with firewood? Astrid smiled. No, Valerius corrected her, his thumb tracing her lower lip. I got a Valkyrie who fought death itself to save strangers. You are the strongest warrior this kingdom has ever known, Astrid. And you are mine. And you are mine, she whispered. Valerius leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow, deep, and full of infinite devotion. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a promise that as long as the moon shone, the White Wolf and her king would rule together. Below them, the city lights flickered on one by one, like stars reflecting the glory of the new reign. The long winter was over. The golden age of the White Queen had begun. You have just listened to a tale from the Moonlight Mates Library. If Astrid's incredible journey from a freezing shed to the obsidian throne inspired you, please leave a like and share this story with someone who needs to believe in their own hidden strength. And I'm curious, tell me in the comments below, what do you think about Astrid's final judgment? Was forcing Alpha Yora and his family to live in the rotting shed the perfect poetic justice? Or would you have chosen a different punishment? To uncover more stories of hidden bloodlines, royal romance, and satisfying revenge, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. The library is always open for you. Until the next chapter, sweet dreams.